All right. Welcome to the Super Happy Joe and John Yay Show. My guest today is John. Again. Wow, what a privilege. And I'm his guest. My name is Yancy. Welcome to the show. We're still working on a name. If you can make any suggestions, we'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. John.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thanks very much.
Today, we want to discuss something which is quite current.
Mm-hmm.
You're an Englishman. Well, you're a Brit.
Yeah.
You're a Brit. I'm an Afrikaner. Your dad shot. No, sorry, your granddad probably shot my granddad at some stage, somewhere. I forgive you for that. It's okay.
You probably deserved it.
Probably. In any case, okay. So what I want to discuss today is the term is called assimilation.
Assimilation. Yeah.
Assimilation. So the question is, how much assimilation does a South African need to do, or a Brit for that matter, if they were to move to the US?
Okay.
Because the reason I'm asking this is I hear a lot of this talk. There's a guy on YouTube called Professor G. He's a very pro-Afrikaans American. He's a lawyer. There's also Colonel Chris Wyatt, well-respected men. I respect both of them. Yeah. Very good, good guys, good people. And they often speak of assimilation. There seems to be trouble with some ethnic groups who move to the US and they don't assimilate.
Yeah.
So my question would be, how much must, if I were to go to the US, or if a Brit had to go to the US, how much assimilation would be required?
Okay, so the obvious starting point is to work out what we mean by assimilation. I suppose the logical way to do that would be to look at historically what has happened where one group of people have moved into a country controlled by another group of people. And if you want to look at successful assimilation, we need to find historical examples of how that has been done in a way that hasn't produced negative outcomes. And then if we can derive principles from those examples, we can then apply those principles to today, if that sounds logical.
Yes, and I also want to throw in something else. Is it important to assimilate? Why not? Yeah. Why don't the Americans assimilate to the culture that's coming to them?
Yeah.
Or I say Americans. Why doesn't a nation assimilate to a culture that's come to them?
Yeah. So I think it's actually a question which, if looked at in a very cursory, superficial way, seems to have an obvious solution. But we've got to be careful not to be hypocritical in the way we discuss the question, because when you talk about assimilating into countries that have a Judeo-Christian legislative and cultural framework, it's more straightforward than when we talk about kind of mixes between kind of other religions. So I'll give you an example. Let's imagine you're British and you're talking about how other people could come into the UK and assimilate. I think to understand what we mean by that, we need to look at the converse, which is where you have kind of self-imposed apartheid. So, for example, you have people from, let's say, the kind of Indian subcontinent, possibly Pakistan, coming into Britain and then doing what typically happens nowadays, which is to segregate themselves. Now, you don't necessarily blame them, where you go into an area where, for example, they share your taste in food, they have the same religion, they have the same places of worship that you'll be using. It's entirely logical that you would want to find yourself amongst like-minded people with similar kind of tastes and interests and culture. So that is very understandable. Where it becomes objectionable to the host population is where then other aspects of civic responsibility become neglected. For example, the responsibility to learn how to communicate in the language of the host country. You'll find little enclaves of people in host countries where they don't even speak the language of the host country. Some of their relatives do, and that was maybe the basis of them coming to the country in the first place, the kind of common links they had with the host country, but then they'll invite relatives who go to that part of the country for whom there's just no benefit, as they perceive it, to learn the native language. And so as far as the host country is concerned, they are welcoming in the sense that they respect the right of families to live together, but now they grow to become resentful because what it looks like is that that enclave is kind of creating its own country within a country. They'll have their own culture, their own rules to a degree, their own language. And so it looks like they're kind of carving up a part of their country. And their population's growing, and it almost looks like a kind of a cancer within their country. Not in the sense of it being an overtly negative thing, because that's an entirely different question to compare the relative merits of one group of people, its religion, its customs, versus that of the host country. But cancer in the sense that it quickly takes over the host and spreads. And so I think that's the opposite of assimilation that you need to factor in when working out what positive assimilation actually is. So from my perspective, in order to see how one is supposed to assimilate when going to another country, you need to look at positive historical examples. And the most obvious have been the way that the Jewish people have assimilated into other cultures. And the reason for that is that it was always their tradition to record their history. So we know far more about how they've assimilated than about other nations. And also because for one reason or another, they've often been at the brunt of persecution, it's been far more necessary for them to assimilate into so many other countries than for any other tribe or ethnic group or discernible group of distinct people. And so their history obviously goes back quite a long time to, I don't know, maybe we should look at what happened during the famine in Israel at the time of Joseph being sold by his brethren into Egypt. Now, it's interesting because they were entirely at the mercy of Pharaoh. And before they went there, they were briefed to avoid giving unnecessary offense. So do you remember Joseph said to his brothers, when you go there, whatever you do, do not describe yourself as shepherds, because that's highly distasteful. And the first thing they do is they describe themselves as shepherds, you know. But so obviously they weren't particularly good at it initially. But the important point is that it was their intention not to give needless offense and to respect the culture of wherever it was they were going. And now the thing is, if you look at what they did, and this is where we've got to be careful that we don't become hypocritical. You see, we could say what assimilation means is to deliberately penetrate into the culture as deeply as possible and almost spurn the connections that you would maybe otherwise forge with your own people within that host country. But actually, the Israelites didn't do that. Now, whether they didn't do that through choice or whether because Pharaoh knew it would be contentious to have, you know, unclean shepherds living amongst their own people that would potentially create friction within their communities isn't quite clear. I would tend to say that that was the case. So, of course, he put them in Goshen, didn't he? And so they actually had their own little enclave there.
By the way, when I read that piece, it almost, in my head, I read it as Pharaohs almost disgustingly, they can have the land of Goshen,
Yeah.
because they were told,
Yeah.
don't tell them you sheep herders, and
Yeah.
then they go and do that.
Yes.
And I can't imagine Pharaoh was very chuffed that his second in command's family were actually below what they expected them to be.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. But it's very interesting, because that kind of tension between this natural disgust at people with a despicable culture coming into your country being balanced against the perceived benefit of immigration persists right to the present day. So in, for example, Western countries, the argument is always made that immigration has a net positive effect. And of course, you've got super clever people from all around the world coming into countries like the United States. Like after the Second World War, you had super clever people, scientists and whatnot, a lot of Jews, and even on the other side, a lot of Nazis, super clever Nazis, who had gained all sorts of valuable scientific information from trying to work out how to destroy as many of our lives as possible, and murdering and torturing Jews and all of the kind of biological information they got from that. And of course, then you had the Jews who had been persecuted by those people also ending up in America. So you had people from very kind of disparate kind of value systems ending up in the same place. And America found a way to benefit from both forms of migration. They kind of developed the potential of these super clever Jewish minds and the extraordinary advances that these Nazi nerds had developed, and ended up with like a weapons program and scientific advancements that no other country in the world was capable of. But if you look at that, America post-Second World War had the kind of volume, it had its own population capable of coping with that level of immigration. You're talking about relatively small numbers. And you had people who came from scenarios where they knew they couldn't survive in those scenarios, so they were grateful to come to the host country and very respectful of the culture in that country. It wasn't a case of this kind of arrogant attitude you can sometimes have, where you look down on the host country as something weak to be exploited. And I think, sadly, modern immigration patterns would tend to display those kinds of characteristics very often. And in the UK, I think that's what's happening. You see, in the UK, what I think has happened is there's been such... Now, I'm going to speak from the perspective of people who come from quite an ancient culture where they've maintained the value system for a very long time. Not whether it's a good or a bad thing, but it's kind of been consolidated over many generations, and adherents to it have strong confidence in it as a system. So whereas in the UK, we were historically a country that derived its morality and value systems and culture from our Judeo-Christian moral heritage, in maybe even just the last 50 years, we've jettisoned most of that, at least as far as the political narrative now is concerned. It doesn't mean that the ordinary British people have given that up. I think they would actually identify with the basis of our kind of moral foundation still quite closely, but it's no longer popular to own that foundation. So just to give you an example, before we look at how people from stronger kind of moral frameworks would see it. So historically in the UK, you had Christian values, which meant that the man was supposed to be the head of the family. And I'm not going to make any comments as to whether or not that should be the case today. It's an entirely separate discussion, but it was the case. where the man would be the breadwinner. He would be responsible for making decisions on behalf of the family, defending the family, going out earning a living for the family, while the woman's responsibility would be to kind of assist that effort, but where it was necessary for one or the other gender to do a given role, that role would be taken by the gender that was most biologically advantaged to performing that role. Like, for example, giving birth to children. It's much more straightforward for a female to give birth to a child, even in this day and age. Yeah.
Slightly.
And
I haven't given birth yet.
Yeah.
So, it's something I've considered. And, I'm thinking about it, but I've not yet.
Yeah. Well,
I am advanced in age.
Yeah.
So I think my time is running out.
But I mean, if and when that happens, I think what will become clear is that it would be far more convenient if a female gave birth in your place. And so historically,
I feel slightly slighted by that comment, but we'll let that slide for afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that historically was the case.
Yeah.
And so when then, in the modern era, that is displaced, you have to try to work out what are the kind of moral values on which modern society is structured. So, for example, let's just take something a little bit controversial. So, I think in 2015, in the United Kingdom, there was a new piece of legislation that was introduced against coercion. So whereas, for example, okay, let me just take the real world, because in the real world, there is conflict, there's disagreement within family. So whereas prior to 2015, let's just imagine a young man has a new wife, and in the past, they were going out to, I don't know, pubs, nightclubs, whatever, enjoying themselves. And now they're married, and the man has to maybe work harder. And let's say it was a kind of a traditional family, and spend more time going out working, and the lady doesn't yet have children. And so now the lady, both of the man and the woman, may kind of hanker after aspects of their life prior to being married. So the man might miss having been on his football team or something and going out with the lads for a pint every few nights or whatnot. But now he realizes he's got to actually forget about that, because he's now building a family, having to pay for a mortgage, that kind of thing. And the lady may have enjoyed her nights out with the girls and whatnot. And so being married, they don't just want to totally give up all aspects of their previous lifestyles that they would feel made them them. And so now just take an example where the lady is invited by her unmarried female friends to go for a night out with the ladies. And now the husband thinks, well, hang on, this is risky, because I know my fellow men. I know what they talk about when the ladies are not around. And you are suggesting going out as a group of ladies into let's say, a pub or a nightclub, surrounded by predators who may have Rohypnol, spike your drinks, and you might kind of wake up at 3 a.m. in some strange house with some man standing over you who's basically just raped you, date raped you. Okay, now I, as a man who am sensitive about risk, because it's my responsibility historically to protect you, I'm going to not allow you to go out with these ladies and risk getting raped for very little perceived benefit. So I'm going to say, sorry, darling, that's just not going to happen.
In Afrikaans, we say, dis uit soos perdry in 'n kerk.
And something about church.
Riding a horse in a church.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, okay. Okay, so now that conversation may not be a very comfortable conversation for the lady, because she's now then got to go to her friends and say, sorry, my husband doesn't really want that to happen. And she knows they're going to say, but hang on a moment, that's a bit outrageous. Does he not want you having friends? And she'll say, yeah, he wants me to have friends, but, you know, he says, why can't you people just come over for a coffee or something? And they're saying, but
why is he so concerned about rape?
yeah,
and really?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Your husband is such a cramp.
Yeah, that's it. And so they will then start feeding ideas to her that she's married someone who's paranoid and
A dictator.
Yeah, if he's thinking about all these things, maybe he's telling you things about his psychology that you didn't even know before you married him. Who have you just married? And wow, he sounds a bit controlling. Yeah, and so he's basically planning on putting an end to all your fun, is he? And she says, well, no, he's not like that. You don't really know him. And she says, then her friends will say, no. This is what's known as Stockholm Syndrome. He will become more and more controlling of you. He'll start making you fear, putting all these scare stories in your mind. The more he does so, the more you'll feel this kind of insane loyalty to him. And the more he's going to be marginalizing you from us, your only kind of source of sanity left in your life now. And so
the only way to fix that is by coming out with us on a night out, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you need to put your foot down, okay? This isn't the Victorian era now, okay? And so then you have this kind of conflict. Now, the man, I'm not saying he's like a theological scholar or anything like that. He's just like a normal kind of man. I'm just wondering if we should just quickly take a break there and just check that the camera's still running. You don't need to do anything. So I'll just yeah, it is. It's 22 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to switch on the actual timer.
Okay, yeah. So, the guy's just a normal guy, but his version of normality, which may have been normal for centuries, you can't say nightclubs were normal for ladies for centuries, but the principle that he makes decisions. Sometimes those decisions are popular, maybe in 8 or 9 cases out of 10, because typically men want a peaceful life, and they'll generally listen to what the lady wants and make decisions that are heavily biased to what they do want, unless they think the lady wants something that is kind of incompatible with the overall plan for the family. But yes, in some instances, those are going to be unpopular decisions. Now, historically, the man's leadership was not undermined. But now, typically what happens in a scenario like that is that the lady gets a lot of input from maybe her other lady friends, who then start briefing against the guy. And since 2015 now, there's just no leg for the man to stand on, because if the man tells his wife, sorry, darling, but I just don't want you going out with your lady friends into a predatory environment where there's kind of no one to look out for you, because I know what men are like. That conversation can be cited as evidence in a criminal prosecution against the man. I don't know if you're aware of this.
No.
This is in the
UK.
Yeah, this is not an exaggeration. It's known as coercive control. So if the man can provide evidence to the lady that he has a persistent pattern of behavior that tends towards preventing her from doing things she wants to do, or requiring her to do things she doesn't want to do, that's then defined as coercive control. And
so just on that point, we don't necessarily have a problem with the law, coercive control. So I wouldn't have a problem with that. It's where the line is drawn, right?
Well, it depends who we are.
Yeah. So let's say they brought out a law like that, and it's to curb some irrational man type from locking his wife up in a closet. Right? That's coercive control, right? That's abusive, right?
Yeah.
That would be a good law, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
But now, when you're just exercising what has traditionally been the role of the male in the relationship, now you're just doing something normal.
Yes.
Now that's perceived as breaking the law.
Yeah.
As being a dictator or a coercive, controlling psychopath.
Yeah. And, you know, I wish I were exaggerating, but I'm really not. If you, we could even run a test here. We could go to ChatGPT and let me just ask. Okay. So let's imagine a newly married couple is in a situation where the lady gets invited by her friends to go out to nightclubs, and the man is uncomfortable with that, and he places fear in the mind of the lady by talking about what he perceives as the realities of the threats that exist, such as predatory men in that environment putting Rohypnol in the lady's drinks and then taking them away and raping them. And the lady now experiences fear, which then compels her to cooperate with the man. And her other lady friends allege that this man is now controlling. Would there be a criminal case, the basis of a criminal case against the man for coercive control since 2015? Interesting, because I've tried not to frame the argument in a way that supports my concerns. I've been very, very neutral in that. Still thinking, which is strange. Okay. But anyway, so we'll see what it says in a moment. Okay, let's just. Yes, there can be a criminal case in principle under UK law, but only if very specific legal thresholds are crossed. The situation you describe sits exactly on the fault line between legitimate marital influence and criminal coercive control. Now,
that already is a problem.
Exactly, yes. Because now what that means is a clever lawyer can easily get this person prosecuted in prison.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the fault line. Now, all of a sudden, that's a fault line. Decades ago, that was common sense.
Yeah.
To protect your family, it's a common sense thing. Now, all of a sudden...
12 years ago.
Okay, 12 years ago, it was common sense. Now it's a fault line.
That's right.
So this is a dangerous area now.
That's right.
Yeah. And a clever lawyer can, wreak havoc.
Even a fairly stupid lawyer, the way the law is biased. So controlling or coercive behavior in an intimate or family relationship. This offense has 5 core elements. So A, they're personally connected, so being married qualifies. The behavior is repeated or continuous. That's why I spoke about a pattern of behavior. The behavior is controlling or coercive. It has a serious effect on the victim. So it's very easy for her friends to testify that she's really worried now. She's fearful to talk to her husband. She fears he may get angry. Because if your husband says to you, I don't want you risking getting date raped with your kind of lady friends and no one on shark watch around you looking after you. And then she comes back to him and she says, oh, you're overreacting. My lady friends say ABC. If he's a normal guy, he's going to get upset. You know, unless he's some kind of manipulative kind of politician type, you could just calmly talk to her in a manipulative, coercive way. He's probably going to get upset and say, you know, why are you doing this? I'm just trying to protect you and keep my family together and all that kind of thing. And then finally, the defendant knows or ought to have known it will have that effect. If a man is warning a lady about getting date raped in the middle of the night, and he's kind of painting the picture for her, he knows it's going to strike fear into her heart. Now, he would regard it as a legitimate use of fear in the same way that if your child wants to go and play in the street, you could legitimately strike fear into their heart by saying, look, I'm going to show you what happens when a lorry drives over
Watermelon.
a can. Or, and now let's just imagine that was your head, little Jimmy. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, he's going to be fearful. Yeah.
If little Jimmy was a real... No, never mind.
Yeah, okay. But you get the point. Those 5 elements could very, very easily be proven in a court.
Yeah.
So what serious effect legally means is that the victim fears violence on at least 2 occasions. Now, violence is not defined as the man laying his hands on her, you see.
Yeah.
Simply jumping up and down and gesticulating. She's, by him being angry or raising his voice, she will then say she was fearful.
Well, John, in our day and age, disagreement is seen as violence.
Yes.
You disagree with someone, they can claim violence against them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the sad reality.
And so look, the CPS, that's the Criminal Prosecution Service, their guidance define controlling or coercive as repeated intimidation or threats or humiliation or deprivation of liberty. Okay, so depriving her of the liberty to go out with her friends at night, which she might think is reasonable because she's an innocent kind of thinking person who doesn't kind of think on the part of these predators. And micromanagement of social life. In other words, no, I don't want you seeing Susie because every time you go out with her, you come back kind of drunk, and you should see the clothing Susie wears. That kind of...
I've never trusted Susie.
Yeah, no, yeah. I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Susie.
And then look at the
next... It's not you, it's me.
Yeah, isolation from friends, do you see? And then inducing fear in order to regulate behavior. Look, if you go out there to that nightclub kind of late at night with a bunch of girls, there's a very high chance that at some point you're going to get rehypnoled and you're going to get date raped.
Especially if
that's
Susie's
inducing fear. Yeah, exactly.
So, it's almost, this is almost like reverse Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, yeah.
This is, I mean, this sort of thing strikes fear into the heart of the female, so that she ends up believing Susie and her friends as the better option. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like a reverse Stockholm. You're going to be bound to something.
That's right.
So if you're not really bound to your husband, you're going to be bound to something.
Yes. So I just want to ask, so let us imagine that the wife in this case never actually fears physical violence in terms of the man laying his hands on her, but all other elements of what you describe are indeed present. He continuously points out how risky it is and inculcates fear in the lady of any kind of scenario where she goes out with her female friends without a man present to look out for them. Would she still have a case against him? I know the answer, and it's yes. So just to go back a little bit, so when it becomes criminal, as if all of the following are true. He repeatedly uses fear to restrict her autonomy, and even that word, historically, the twain shall become one flesh. You make decisions together. Now, it may be that if you actually look historically at how men make decisions, generally speaking, if the wife is particularly submissive, she actually becomes the controlling element in the overwhelming majority of decisions. So it may be that, whereas historically those decisions were made together, but the man took ultimate responsibility for those decisions, now the law insists on her autonomy, you see. So it wants her to be able to make decisions independently of him. And it needs to show a pattern of him repeatedly using fear to restrict her autonomy. And if she asks to go out twice with her lady friends to a nightclub, and both times he says, no, I explained to you last time what I fear is likely to happen. High risk of being date raped. That qualifies, okay? Because he has repeatedly used fear.
He's a repeat violator of trying to protect his own wife.
That's right.
Disgusting.
Now, his purpose is behavioral domination rather than safety. Okay, now who decides what's safety? I can remember.
And for how long?
Yeah.
How long is the definition valid before it's changed again? Before another clever lawyer. And I just want to apologize right now. I've used the words clever and lawyer in the same sentence. So if it does offend anyone out there, I can't tell you how much it offends me. But in any case, another lawyer comes along and changes another definition.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so I can tell you, I mean, I can remember seeing a documentary of some former soldiers or maybe current soldiers assisting parliamentary ministers in the United Kingdom with case protection. And what typically happened is they became aware of a threat, or at least sensed a threat, because they're trained to notice things that the minister isn't. And so they would then push the minister's head down, shove her into a car and drive away very quickly. And the minister was entirely kind of blissfully oblivious to any kind of a threat. And so she would keep complaining to these case protection officers for overreacting all the time. I wasn't in danger. I wanted to have my little photo opportunity there, and you've just ruined it all, you see.
She doesn't see the sniper on the roof or the knife that's heading towards her. Those folks are trained to see it.
That's it, and so again and again, in this documentary, she would complain about her case protection team and never give them credit because...
And this actually happened?
Yes,
You sure it's not a mockumentary?
No. And you can understand it logically, because how would she ever know when they have protected her?
Ironically, they should have left her once at least to be stabbed or shot, and then she would have understood the actual
and that's
danger.
Human nature. Human nature is that you only, it's like, let's just imagine that the Judeo-Christian proposition happened to be true, okay? And that one day, pretty much all of us are going to die, okay? And after
Most
death,
of us.
there's going to be a judgment. Okay, that's what Christianity says.
That's what Hebrews says, right?
Right. Yeah. Now let's imagine that's true. And before you die, you're given a means of escape. And the overwhelming majority of people reject that option. If it transpires to be the case that Christianity happens to be true, it's going to be the most convincing evidence of the fact that people only act once it's too late. And that's the nature of managing risk. So this politician, the only time she would ever appreciate the work being done by these CPAs is if they didn't do their job. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I say. Ironically, the only thing that convinced her is that they just sat back and she got shot or stabbed.
Yes.
And then from then on, if she lived through that ordeal, she would have been very grateful.
That's right.
For even the most rough-handed protection service.
That's right. So when you look at the law in the UK, and it says his purpose is behavioral domination rather than safety, it's highly illogical, and it betrays a total misunderstanding of human psychology, because what is the purpose of any form of domination if it serves no end? Domination is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. So, for example, let's imagine you've got some cruel, tyrannical dictator who wants to dominate his people. Well, why does he want to dominate his people? In order to achieve what end? There's always an end. Maybe he was bullied at school and he has that Maslowian vacuum in terms of wanting to be accepted or acknowledged or appreciated or praised, like pretty much every human has at some level, So he has an end, and his domination is the means to that end. For the law to cite domination as an end in itself is absurd. And it could never be proven. So the man may insist until he's blue in the face that his reason for wanting to dominate his wife is to protect her and to keep the family together. And yet he could never prove that in a court of law unless he didn't do his role and his wife ended up getting date raped. Only then, once it's too late, could he say, you see, that's why I didn't want her to go to the nightclub with her friends. You see what I mean? Because any kind of evidence he cites could easily be kind of countervailed, if that's the right word, by opposing evidence. So he could say, oh, but I read in the newspaper last week that a bunch of girls did get date raped. And then the lawyer can say, okay, so what percentage of girls have got date raped and what percentage haven't? Of course, it's a complex argument because most rapes aren't reported because of shame or because the lady doesn't think anything's going to be done about it. You know, the overwhelming majority of rapes are not reported. But anyway, let's just imagine that those weightings were factored in. There'd still be a majority of ladies who go to nightclubs who don't end up getting raped. You see what I mean? And there may be a majority of children who go out and play football in the street who don't end up getting their heads crushed by a lorry, you know?
Yeah.
And so you could never prove the legitimacy of the basis of your concerns. And it would be far easier to prove in terms of satisfying kind of evidentiary demands that, bearing in mind the context in which this legislation even exists and the presuppositions that it's based on, that you are alleged to be a controlling, domineering man that only has your own interests at heart. Those are the kind of foundational presuppositions of this legislation. And within that context, it's impossible for a man to prove the legitimate basis of his concerns. And the next, she changes her normal life out of fear, not choice. In other words, yes, I decided not to go out with my lady friends because I was fearful either A, that there was a basis for his concerns, I'd get date raped, or B, when I got home, he'd be very angry with me, which a normal man would be. And finally, so that shows that's all that's required to show a serious effect, that she changes her behavior through fear. It's a little bit like saying a person becomes a Christian through fear of hell. And so according to this kind of legislative psychological basis, it would be immoral to convince a person to consider the Christian proposition on the basis of the possibility of the existence of hell. In other words, you've got to remove any kind of negative motivation.
I mean that's a bit of a problem, because there's a road sign that says don't go faster than 120 for a reason. Have the fear of not ramming into another car at high speed. That's fear. Have the fear to not drive 100 k's an hour in town. So that you don't end up with a person on your windshield. You know? These are legit fears, right?
Absolutely.
So to not live by fear, it's ridiculous. Everybody has fear to some degree, and that's a good thing.
It's a thoroughly good thing. It's why it exists. I mean,
otherwise we'd all just go jump off Van Stadens, right? Jump off the bridge because what the heck? There's no fear.
That's it.
Right?
That's right.
I think we were built with fear.
So whether you believe that we were intelligently designed, or whether you believe that we evolved through time and chance, the fact is, in both camps, there's an incontrovertible argument for the validity and usefulness of fear. So to legislate in such a way that fear should not constitute an aspect of a person's motivation for decision-making is against nature, whether you look at it from a design point of view or an evolutionary point of view. It's entirely illogical. But anyway, And then he knows, finally, he knows this fear is what is driving compliance. Okay? So it's like he knows that by being upset with the lady, which he genuinely is, if she keeps defying him by exposing herself to that risk. And I mean, look, from his perspective, if she gets raped and he inhabits kind of a Judeo-Christian paradigm, even if he's not even religious, he's still going to have to, if that rape results in conception, he's now going to have to raise that child as his own. So there's a massive burden that's placed on him. The outcome of that risk, if things go wrong, far disproportionately outweighs the potential gains if that risk doesn't go wrong. And it's an incredibly unfair position to put him in, but nonetheless, that's what's on the statute books and has been for the last 11 years. Okay, so now, that's just intended as a little parenthesis.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give you a concrete example, because otherwise you could say, well, what's really the problem? It's a Judeo-Christian country. What is the basis of the supreme confidence of Muslim adherents coming into a country like the United Kingdom?
And just based on because I've heard this before, Christianity, you're supposed to love your neighbor.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So obviously the right thing is to just let everybody into your house, isn't it? So just park that one there for later, but we got to consider that too, because I've often heard that, especially from the more, I don't want to say liberal, from the more left side of things. The stone is often thrown, and it's said, listen, you guys are hypocrites because Jesus said you must love your neighbor. And so therefore you must obviously just let them in, Never mind, it's from people who would never open their own gates, just by the way, for any foreigner. Yeah. But they love to...
Well, they generally go to space.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Or they may not have the spare money. You see.
Yeah.
But, and there are things to discuss there, because the scriptures do actually talk about an obligation,
charity,
and to look after the stranger, because some of you were strangers. You see.
Yeah. So it's a valid point.
There is certainly a valid aspect to it.
But how do you balance it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to dispense with it super quickly, yes, we're told be careful how you entertain strangers, look after the stranger because some of you were strangers. It's talking to the Israelites when they came out of Egypt, where they were strangers, and they were looked after very well initially by the Pharaoh who knew Joseph before they were put into slavery by the Pharaoh who didn't. And so their survival is owed to the fact that a host nation was willing to treat them well as strangers, as refugees, their very survival. And so within the Judeo-Christian moral kind of heritage, there has always been that sense that we have an obligation to take care of the stranger. And that's well and good. However, there's also the obligation to look after the poor. And so where you have a number of obligations, which are arguably competing obligations, you obviously have to establish a hierarchy of priorities or responsibilities or obligations. And so if, for example, let's to make the rationalization as straightforward as possible, let's think of a family kind of analogically for a nation. So let's imagine you have a family and it's a young couple who are struggling. They've just got a new house. They're paying a mortgage. Maybe one of them is still looking for work. well, no, they wouldn't get the mortgage if they were. Anyway, they put down the deposit, they've spent all their life savings on the deposit, they're both working hard to pay the mortgage. And now, let's say in the evening, they do their Bible reading and it says, oh, we're supposed to be looking after the poor. So I suppose now we need to just go and take a certain amount of money and go out into the street and start giving to the poor, which on its own is a wonderful thing, a very good thing. The problem you have is that you haven't worked out where that obligation sits within your hierarchy of obligations. So the consensus ought to be, well, this is something we need to aspire to execute the moment it becomes compatible with our superior hierarchical obligations. In other words, okay, yeah, let's work hard. Let's not waste too much money on entertainment and going out to restaurants too often and that kind of thing. And let's put a certain proportion of our available income into a fund that maybe at least matches what we spend on entertainment. And then once a month, let's go and see who we can help to fulfill that obligation. And that might be a reasonable way of doing it. What is not reasonable is to then get more debt to pay for your concrete obligations, your unavoidable, non-negotiable obligations, in order to then be able to prosecute that perceived responsibility to go out onto the street and help the poor. It's completely a disruption of your moral hierarchy. And so as that pertains to a nation, I would say exactly the same thing would be true. If as a nation you decide, okay, we're prosperous, we don't have obscene levels of debt, let's see how we can kind of extend our benevolence beyond our borders. And as a nation, they decide that that is the right thing to do. And I think most nations historically actually would. Then they have a program. Let's vote on a quota for how many people we should invite in to our country to help. That's an entirely civilized and morally consistent way of doing it. The problem is when you have a nation in trillions of debt that has societal problems which will be exacerbated by actions that tend away from civic unity, that then becomes an unacceptable disruption of that nation's hierarchical moral framework. See what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm taking it back to the family. Say, for instance, you and your wife, you're well on your way, you're paying your mortgage, you now have a child, maybe two, you decide to adopt, right? That child that you're adopting, you're not going to just make him do whatever he wants. He's not going to become the head of the house. He's going to assimilate, right?
Well, in which jurisdiction? Because now in the United Kingdom, that's no longer permissible. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No.
Yeah. So let's imagine now you are a Christian family. So there's no law per se against being Christian in the United Kingdom.
Not yet.
Well, I mean, arguably not even arguably, there are laws against living as a Bible-believing Christian in the United Kingdom. That's absolutely beyond dispute. And if you care to challenge me, I can prove it to you. But right now, there is no law against believing the premises of Christianity within the United Kingdom. So let's imagine a Christian couple adopts a child, and you suggested that that couple would then require that child to assimilate into their family. Okay, now historically, of course, that is entirely what one would expect. But in the United Kingdom, that way of thinking has now been criminalized. I can give you an example. Let's imagine that child attends school, okay? And let's imagine in school, let's say this is quite a sensitive child, an intelligent child, and that child doesn't fit in with hoi polloi. And so it's teased or mocked, something like that, by the more rough children. And it doesn't feel part of them. So it starts questioning its identity. And then its teacher helpfully sits down with it and says, look, little Jimmy, you don't have to feel like you are one of these rough boys. A lot of young people in your position realize that they may have been born into a boy's body, but they're not actually a boy. Yeah. And we live in a day and age where our nice government actually gives you the liberty to decide for yourself.
To cut it off.
So, little Jeremy, here's a little book I can give you. You go home and read it. Maybe you won't want to show your parents because they're old-fashioned and
they don't have to see.
They wouldn't understand this. Yeah. If I scored a paper written by them, I'd give them very low understanding. So you just take your time, you read that book, and you can come back and in break time, you can come and talk to me about whether maybe you feel that actually you're a little girl. Yeah. And so little Jimmy goes home, he reads this book about how there was a little boy who was teased by the rough boys, realized actually he was a girl, went to get an operation done, was allowed to wear makeup and grow his hair long and all that kind of thing, and then started playing with the little girls and lived happily ever after, you see. Now, little Jimmy thinks this is wonderful because he sees all those little girls playing nicely in the corner, and there's no kind of roughness or teasing or anything like that. And he sees something he wants to be a part of. So he goes to the teacher and says, I
want to be little Jimmy.
That's right, yes, that's right. And so the teacher then writes a letter.
It's just one letter change.
Yeah, I mean,
so simple.
Obviously, I don't know how
to
the
change
mechanics
your gender.
work. Teachers probably don't write letters. But the fact is, the education institution communicates with the parents. The fact that little Jimmy has decided he wants to become a girl. And it is now their obligation to cooperate with the authorities to cut off his organ of generation. I don't know exactly what they do, but basically perform some kind of biological mutilation and let him wear makeup and inject hormones into him and all that kind of thing. Because now little Jimmy has decided that actually he's a girl. And so now the parents, if they have a conversation with little Jimmy like this, and they say, little Jimmy, look, we know what it's like when you don't fit in. It can be tough, you know, but you're a smart young boy. The reason you don't fit in is because you're sensitive, you're smart, you're more of a thinker, you're more kind of introspective, obviously using nice childish language. And those little boys there, they're not really smart. So they've got more of a kind of a hound pack mentality.
Are they jealous of you?
Yeah, that's right.
Probably jealous of you.
Yeah. So you just persist, you know, it's character building, you know, it's tough. Some nights you'll feel like crying into your pillow. Come talk to us and, you know, we'll help you out and we'll...
And in a few years, it's all forgotten.
Yeah, that's right.
And you still have your...
That's right. Yeah.
That thing.
That's right. You can start your own family and all that kind of thing. But at this stage, now, of course, little Jimmy's not thinking 20 years ahead. He just wants to relieve the immediate emotional pain. And so now he goes back to the teacher and cries and says, oh, I really wanted to become a girl, but my parents won't let me. They say it's against the Bible and all that kind of thing. Do you know what will happen in the UK?
Oh, they'll probably take the child away from the parents.
Yeah. And not only that, there'll likely be criminal charges. Yeah. Yeah. Just to be sure I'm not exaggerating.
Is this, are they at least, let's see what I'm looking for. Do they apply the same rules to all religions?
No.
Is it?
No, because some...
If a Hindu or a Muslim, I mean, would they react the same way?
There are different levels
if a Muslim father says to his child, there's no way we're going to allow this. You will remain a boy. Will charges be brought against that Muslim father? or if a Hindu, or if an atheist, or if a, is the playing field level?
It may not be a particularly relevant comparison because it may not be such a cultural norm for Muslims to, I don't know, I mean, I don't want to speak beyond my knowledge.
But it's a valid question, I think.
A Muslim to adopt someone from a kind of, I don't know, a kafir background or whatever they call it. I don't know if that's like a probiotic drink or what they call unbelievers.
Yeah, no, kafir.
Yeah.
It's the unbeliever,
Yeah. So it may not be so much an aspect of their culture. They don't so habitually create problems for themselves like that, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And they have a, well, no, I don't want to go further than that.
Yeah.
So whether or not that would ever materialize is something else. But also, the kind of ironic consequence of Britain's Judeo-Christian moral heritage is that we've always had a culture of providing superior protection to those who need it most. So whereas the more kind of ruthless cultures that exist around the world, where weakness is not tolerated, and where, I mean, take some countries in Eastern Europe. There's a certain country that I don't want to mention in Eastern Europe where there's quite a scandal because there are orphanages that consist almost entirely of disabled children. They may have a physical or mental disability, and the parents don't want them, so they palm them off to these orphanages, and they're basically hidden away because the culture there is not to embrace weakness or to defend weakness, but to get rid of it.
It's thoroughly Darwinian, right?
It's eugenic, and that's one of the things which I've tried to stand against in the United Kingdom in whatever small capacity I can, because we've got a kind of infection of eugenics in. I won't say in our legislation, but at least in incursions into our current culture. So to give you an example, if a teenager in the United Kingdom from a historically, economically unproductive background, so let's say she grew up in an area of council houses. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. If she gets pregnant, the medical industry will tend to advise her to terminate the pregnancy. Whereas, and that will be, I believe, the default advice that's given to her, on the basis that, look, you don't have a long-term partner from what you've told us. It's going to be a real struggle. It's going to prevent you from getting a career. Even like when you're running your OnlyFans account, it's going to be awkward having a little toddler running around or whatever. So if you want to abort it, it's not even alive yet until 24 weeks and 1 day old, unless you move to, I don't know, a European country, in which case it becomes alive at 12 weeks and 1 day old, or 14, depending on which country you move to. But if you stay in the United Kingdom, that organism doesn't become human until 24 weeks and 1 day old. So you've got a little bit of time, and we'll help you with it. It's very straightforward. That's the advice that will be given to, let's say, a 16-year-old who becomes pregnant within that demographic context. Whereas if you are an 18-year-old and you're married to, say, a 25-year-old millionaire, and you turn up at the clinic in your new Range Rover or something like that, it's very unlikely they're going to advise you to terminate the pregnancy. So there is already a eugenicistic bias towards discouraging aspects of the population from growing. Similarly, let's just take the example of even, let's say, a 25-year-old, very successful, wealthy person. If you go to the clinic, and they'll ask you to scan your baby, and if you ask why, they'll say it's just to be sure that there are no defects that we can detect on the scan. And if you ask, well, what's the point of knowing that? I'll find out when it's born. Is there anything you can do to the baby to reduce the consequence of those effects while it's in vitro? They'll say, no, it's just in case you want to terminate the pregnancy. You see what I mean? So both socioeconomically and in terms of physiological elitism, there's already a strong eugenicist bias in the United Kingdom, even though that's not really an aspect of our legislation yet. Yeah. So, but sorry, that was a parenthesis. Where did that come from?
Well, we were busy talking about assimilation.
Yeah.
And we were talking about adoption into a family. And whether assimilation in a family...
Oh, sorry, I got it. What we were saying was that it is an aspect of our Judeo-Christian moral heritage to want to defend the weak.
Yes.
Okay. And so what this has ultimately led to is the existence of protected characteristics. In other words, there is a two-tier, forget about blaming it all on two-tier Keir.
I was gonna... My head was heading towards two-tier Keir.
But you see, of course, he was one of the most senior lawyers in the United Kingdom. So he was entirely versed in the whole kind of legislative tradition of two-tierism in legislation, which incontrovertibly exists. There are certain protected characteristics which, if those characteristics describe you, there's a level of protection in the law that's not accessible to somebody who doesn't possess those characteristics, you see. And so if you have those characteristics, the law is much more lenient with you. And so there are a number of relevant aspects of this. And that is that we as British people, it's programmed into our genetics to want to help the weak. So if a country has a problem, somewhere else, we empathize with their sympathize, with their suffering, and we invite them to come here. We want to protect them. We want to kind of extend our capabilities beyond our borders to help the weak wherever we may find them. And so, again, it's the culture of adoption. If a child's been left in a Marks and Spencer's bag outside a hospital or something, we feel for that child, and we want to...
But if it were any other brand, would you still feel for it, or is it just Marks and Spencer?
To a lesser degree, but it would resonate more with the Marks and Spencer brand. Right. It's a quality product.
Clarify that.
So, yeah, we would... it's not a contradictory value for us to want to build a happy, successful, prosperous family and invite an orphan into that family. It's entirely consistent with our Christian morals. And I can't
which goes back, Alfred's Law, I suppose?
Well, even you can't attribute it to kind of the Christian era. We have to really, to be fair, we have to say it's a Judeo-Christian heritage. Yeah, because there's a lot in the Old Testament about assimilation. So, for example, so very interesting and a little bit controversial. Of course, that when the Israelites warred against an opposing nation, so let's imagine, for example, that if you believe the kind of Judeo-Christian proposition that God communicated with the Israelites through their prophets, let's just work on the assumption that that is true, then when a certain nation displeased God, angered God, and they'd been given the opportunity to turn from their wicked ways, like in the case of Nineveh, for example, where they did indeed turn from their wicked ways, but they'd been given that opportunity and they had disregarded it, then their wickedness reached a level that was such that God was no longer willing to tolerate the continuity of that city or region, or however far that contamination had penetrated. Then he commanded his people to go into that city and destroy everything, including the men, women, and if there were any children left that they themselves hadn't already sacrificed to Molech or something like that. And so that wholesale destruction wasn't always a wholesale destruction. If the level of wickedness that that nation was perceived to have achieved was below a certain threshold, its men would be destroyed, but its women would not necessarily, and the children would not necessarily. Now, if the level of wickedness were less than that, such that only the leaders were wicked and needed to be destroyed, the men also would not be destroyed. But now, of course, because there was an administrative leadership vacuum in that place, the Israelites then had to take care of it, a little bit like Trump thinks he's supposed to do now in Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Yeah.
And possibly in South Africa.
Yeah. So then, of course, the Jews would then take over that area, the kind of leadership and however much of the military that needed to be destroyed in order to agree that it made more sense to give up and side with the Israelites was destroyed. Then those men now wouldn't have a role. And so those men themselves would be assimilated into Jewish families, you see. And that assimilation was really very comprehensive in the sense that there were two ways it could happen, weren't there? So they were required to assimilate for up to a maximum of 6 years. And if after that point they decided, we don't like your value system, we don't like your religion, we want to be independent, on the 7th year, they would then be released. Of course, in the modern vernacular, we call that slavery. So then they'd be released. But in many instances, after those 6 years, those men would say, well, what are we being released to? You people now dominate this region administratively, economically. You now determine the dominant culture here. Where are we going to go? And actually, we see the way you've treated us may not be because you were super nice people, but because your behaviors were ordered by a moral framework that was strictly upheld. And the consequence of that is that we are inevitably treated well. So we would like to stay with your family. In which case, of course, they'd then go up to the door frame and have a earring put through their ear. And then they would become permanent attachments to that family, which is like full assimilation. So I think that's very relevant to how we understand assimilation of people who are escaping something. Now, it's kind of semi-ironic that what these people were escaping were bad conditions that were imposed by the people that were inviting them to assimilate. But of course, they would argue that they are liberating them from worse conditions. You see what I mean? You had tyrants who are, presiding over a religion that allowed for bestiality and child sacrifice and all that kind of thing. And your civilization's going down the drain very fast. We're going to come, put an end to all of that, and invite you to assimilate with us for a limited period until you're on your feet. Then you can decide: do you want to continue assimilating, or do you want to be free? And I think that's a very useful pattern when we look at. But if you want to remain with our family, it's got to be a full-on assimilation. So you have a kind of multi-stage assimilation. So let's imagine, for example, in the United Kingdom, you have people fleeing war-torn countries. What would be kind of historically consistent with that method of assimilation that's taught to us from within the context of our Judeo-Christian heritage is like a two-phase assimilation. One, we're going to give you protection for a certain period until you're stable and the issues that drove you here have subsided. Then you may either be released and go back to wherever you want to be, to have total freedom to live however you want to live. Or you can make the decision: do you want to permanently become a feature of our nation? In which case, there's got to be total assimilation, as represented by the earring through the door frame. You are now physically stuck to our household.
Jy is gechop.
Whatever that means, yeah. And so I think when we talk about assimilating foreigners into our nation, I think we need to have a similarly nuanced, phasal kind of approach. There may be a reason to help people who are in extremis at the time of application, but those people may not want to fully assimilate, in which case you kind of extend mercy to them for a limited period, requires certain behaviors, but then if they don't want to assimilate, it's fine. You release them back to their country once they feel it's safe to do so. Because what you have seen is that a lot of people from Muslim countries may come to the United Kingdom because in their country things are not in good condition. So you may have an ISIS insurgency or something like that. But often these things don't last for a long time. If you look at what's happened in Iran and Syria, things are up and down all the time. So you may have a legitimate application to be a refugee from one of those countries to the United Kingdom, but then after a few years, things have subsided and it's safe to return. Now, let's imagine a Muslim who is a conscientious Muslim who actually believes the tenets of Islam in a very traditional way, wants to come to the United Kingdom. And why the United Kingdom? Why not stop off on the way in all these other countries he's got to pass through by the time he gets there? I don't know, maybe he speaks English, he's got a relative there who's already there, or maybe he respects the consequences of a very consistent Judeo-Christian culture and knows he's not going to be bullied or mistreated. So he targets the United Kingdom. But he still wants to be a very traditional Muslim. Arguably, what would be kind of historically consistent would be to give certain concessions to him to keep him safe for a certain period. And I'm not even saying this should be automatic. Remember the qualification we made earlier. A nation needs to be able to afford it first before it starts helping people outside its territorial bounds. But let's just assume that were already the case, that the nation were stable.
They're looking after their own people. Things are looking good.
That's right. And they say,
a little bit of extra cash after the KFC.
Exactly, to use that analogy. And so let's say the nation agreed on a quota of 50,000 migrants. And let's say it broke that down into, we want 10,000 super clever people who can come here and give things to our nation that our education system is not currently achieving. And let's say 40,000, we want to just help them out of the goodness of our corporate heart, national corporate heart. So of those 40,000, then you would think it would make sense for there to be a kind of a two-phase process of assimilation. One where you basically advertise the benefits of your nation's kind of culture and value system while you are kind to the person for a certain period. And then if they want to remain, they have to become fully
British.
British, yeah.
In every sense.
Yeah, that's right. Including subscribing to your moral heritage. Because absent that, what's going to happen? And that's why we had that quite long diversion about coercive control and all that kind of thing. I just wanted to pick a concrete piece of legislation. Why legislation? Because when you talk about culture, it's like, well, whose culture? If you say, oh, British values, well, what are British values? Who's to say what British values are? You could interview 100 British people and they'd all come up with a different list of what are British values. But once something's on the statute books, that's incontrovertible. Okay, that defines the character of your nation. So let's now imagine we were Muslims, okay, having this conversation, saying we're going to go to the UK because maybe we're a member of a tribal faction that's at risk now from the kind of dominant tribal faction that's now controlling this country, and we're perceived to be threats. So we have to leave. Where are we going to go? Okay, well, as Muslims, we are actually required to do good in the world. Okay, so where can we do the most good? But of course, we also need to be in a position where we can be economically stable. So we'd look at all the different countries and reach a decision based on where we could benefit economically, but where we could also exert positive influence from within the context of our paradigm. And so I would propose, as a devout Muslim, we should target the United Kingdom. Why? Because there's potential for economic gain, and two, because frankly, they really need us. Have you seen? Even now, the man is no longer the head of his family. The woman is not even the head of her family. The woman's single friends that resent the fact that she's married now control her family. That nation's in a real mess. If you allow that state of affairs to continue, that nation's going to be wiped out very fast. They need people like us with a spine to go there and dominate them. You see what I mean? And so we don't want to assimilate into the defunct culture. If they were still a strong Judeo-Christian country, then there'd be no need for us, frankly, because their society would be in order. And I'm speaking from within our context as Muslims in this scenario. The man would be the head of the family, defending the family, making good decisions, spurning any kind of nonsense that comes into their family to want to turn their little boys into girls or to turn the wife against the husband and all that kind of thing. There wouldn't really be a place for us. But now there's a moral imperative on us as Muslims, obviously in this hypothetical scenario, to go to that country and civilize it, because it's going down the tubes very fast. Do you see what I mean? And so within that context, all of this immigration into the United Kingdom from Muslim countries, and particularly from devout Muslims, is predictable and logical. And for them to form enclaves and to grow and then to start trying to take over the country, if you look at the fact that they've got a Muslim mayor of London, they've got Muslim leaders, because you see the difference is Christians have an almost automatic semi-libertarian bent in the sense that we don't really want to interfere with other people's lives.
Live and let live, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's not really our thing to want to exert unsolicited influence, you know. And ironically, the people who end up in politics who are not Muslim, who do exert unsolicited influence, are generally those people who are bullied at school, who are marginalized, have that Maslowian vacuum that we've spoken about, because they didn't fit in at school, now want to kind of get their revenge, wanted to prove that the normal kind of heterosexual, white heterosexuals marrying white heterosexuals, producing all these nice heterosexual families, doing everything in a nice traditional way, that system that has marginalized the kind of nerds and put them on the edge of society, these nerds on the edge of society who were spurned and outcast, now that vacuum, that desire to be significant and accepted and approved of, that then pushes them hard into politics. So you have a situation in politics in countries like the UK, where the only kind of people who habitually are getting into politics are either those who have to prove that the way things have worked for a long time is marginalizing and unfair and wrong, on the one hand, who are necessarily people on the fringes, which is why our politics and decisions that are made by our parliaments don't reflect the will of the people. Or, on the other hand, you have people with a strong moral imperative to come in and fix the perceived damage being perpetrated by these marginal people who have a strong motivation to prosecute their extremely unorthodox agenda. All the damage that is perceived by Muslims to be being done by the involvement of these people in politics now creates precisely the context in which devout Muslims feel it is their moral responsibility to come and address. You see? And so, but again, they're sophisticated in terms of how they gain influence. In the same way that any sophisticated political operator is, whereby you don't disclose your ultimate intention before it's capable of being accommodated and understood, before the people understand the necessity of that position. So it's a kind of a controlled release of information pertaining to your agenda. But ultimately, we know what they want. They want to make the nation of the United Kingdom righteous, as they would see it. They want to get rid of any kind of cultural values.
Madonna Christianity.
What do you mean by that?
Madonna Christianity. I saw something many years ago where many Muslims, they see a video, an MTV video of Madonna, and they associate that with Christianity. Because Madonna is wearing a cross around her neck.
Yes.
So,
and even her name.
Yeah.
And Our Lady.
And so they see the immorality in her music videos.
Yes.
Because it's not exactly the type of music videos I would play at a Sunday school, for instance, or in a church service. And so they see that, and these are the connections they make. Right? Yeah. They think Christianity is weak, and even that other, what's that other bro? Due to the bald head, he's an ex-kickboxer. He's forever in the news now. In any case, he also converted to Islam because he says Christianity is...
Yes, I know the one you're talking about, Andrew Tate.
Andrew Tate.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, is spineless. So... Right. So, okay.
What do you mean by he's spineless? Because that could be interpreted.
No, he says Christians are spineless.
Okay.
And so that's why he converted to Islam, because Islam's got backbone and it's got, bloot and say potlood.
Yeah, it's willing to defend itself.
Yeah.
By any means necessary.
Yeah. I would argue that's probably the main difference between Christianity and Islam. It's the way we evangelize. Yeah. But in any case, that's another discussion.
Yes.
Shall we bring it back to assimilation?
Yes. Yeah. So when we're discussing assimilation, we are trying to define what assimilation actually is. We're looking at historical examples of how it was done, and then we're applying those principles, those historical principles, to the modern day. So, do you feel that we've covered it sufficiently comprehensively, or are there unanswered questions?
No, I think so. But let's go back to the actual question.
Okay.
So taking all of this into consideration, it's not going to take much for an Afrikaner like me to fit in the US.
No.
Right? I've told people before, I'm pretty much an American with a really bad accent. Or a very strange accent.
Like an old-fashioned American.
Yeah. So I mean, because the Americans, they are Judeo-Christian.
Yes.
Right? So I've heard the liberals or the left and atheists argue that's not at all the case. It's nonsense. It's not Judeo-Christian. It's just not true. It's just not true. It is a fact that America was founded on a moral principle that was grounded in Judeo-Christian.
Well, there's no question. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
The question is whether the America or the United States of America of the 21st century still is.
No, but I've heard people say, no, this is I've seen these comments online by these neo-atheists and keyboard warriors where they say it's false. America was not founded on Judeo-Christian values. It's nonsense.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Despite the actual historical evidence, they still argue that no, it's because they say the founding fathers weren't Christian.
They were Illuminati. And Adam Weishaupt and Washington Masons. And
So they say no because they weren't Christian, but that's not the point. They based whatever they created was based on Judeo-Christian values. It's unmistakably true.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I mean, ironically, even the supposed Illuminati, or however that's defined in popular media, derives from Christianity.
Oh yeah, and I mean, just by the way, you can easily join the Illuminati. It's probably something like $30 a month. Illuminati.site or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember the invite now. But very easy.
But the thing is, it was kind of an offshoot of a Jesuit order, wasn't it? I don't think that's really contested. Jesuits obviously being Roman Catholics, which are like a deformed version of
Christianity.
Catholics, which of course is just the universal church, which is Christianity. So but I mean, to not get derailed, which I'm very good at doing, I'm afraid, for you to assimilate into the United States of America, I would say is actually less effort than a modern person, a person born into a family with modern progressive values to assimilate into their own country. Do you see? Because imagine you were born, or you were born recently, you're a millennial, born in a country, in the United States, born in a family, in a context where you are taught that America is a force for evil in the world.
You were born in Minnesota, basically.
Yes, yeah. You now grow up highly complexed because you don't know what your national identity is supposed to be. And it's a kind of a dichotomy. Are you a Christian country, or is Christianity a tool for historic oppression and conquest and all that kind of thing? And so it's a real struggle for you to assimilate into your own country. That's really this kind of injection of antagonistic philosophies into the United States is actually a source of civic discohesion, if that's even a word, or whatever the opposite of cohesion is. And so for you, assimilating, bearing in mind the fact that what we think we know about a country on the basis of the media narrative is very far from what the ordinary people in that country on aggregate feel about their own country. If you do look at what ordinary Americans feel about their own country, the majority would still subscribe to a Judeo-Christian moral paradigm, framework, value system. It's only a small kind of illuminated minority who find massive fault with
illuminated.
So
Illuminati.
So ironically, an Afrikaner who is still very much a product of his Judeo-Christian moral heritage, albeit we have contaminations based on errors that may have been made along the journey of our own nation away from its foundations. Nonetheless, you are still far more obviously a product of that system than a modern person in America who's born into a progressive kind of anti-nationalistic family.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the same can be said for the Brits.
Yeah.
So it's like I think we discussed this before the podcast. What I heard from someone else, culture is downstream from religion.
Yeah.
So I guess what determines assimilation or successful assimilation or lack thereof is ultimately what you believe.
Yes.
But even if you are disingenuous, say for instance you're an atheist,
okay,
but you subscribe to the Judeo, as Dawkins has said, right? Dawkins and Doug Wilson said of Dawkins, he wants the apples, but he doesn't want the orchard, right? So he likes the idea of Christianity, and he would even speak well of the King James. I've heard him say good things about King James, but he's not a Christian, right? But he still says, he said this the other day, we are a nation built on the Judeo-Christian ethic, right? And so even the atheist, if he's willing to lie to himself and accept the Judeo-Christian value, then he'll assimilate.
Yes, yeah. Okay. So so on the subject of assimilation into a country, and the necessity to subscribe to, if you like, broadly speaking, the moral system that governs that country, I would say it seems at first glance like it needs to be necessary. But again, we need to look at historical examples. Because, for example, when the Israelites went to Egypt, did they subscribe to the moral system that dominated Egypt?
Sure, that's a good question, man. I mean, the second in command was a Jew who loved God.
Yeah.
Right? So how much of that permeated through to the rest of the nation?
I think that is actually the critical question, because not only was he second in command, but he had more power than Pharaoh, albeit delegated power, simply because he was more active than Pharaoh.
Pharaoh was very comfortable with letting him run everything.
Yes, yeah. So although it's a little bit like, the relationship between, historically speaking, the relationship between a wife and a husband. The wife may have been, the husband may have been the figurehead and the ultimate decision maker, but practically speaking, in terms of how the family is run, the wife has more influence, you see.
If she knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
So she's clever.
Yeah. So, so politically, there was a marriage between Pharaoh and Joseph. And Joseph had full delegated authority that he had personal discretion to implement, because, of course, he was given Pharaoh's signet ring. And so the question is, was Joseph's appointment as prime minister necessary for Israel's decision to migrate into Egypt? And I would say yes, it absolutely was. Absent that, and as proven subsequently by what happened historically, because when there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, I think in Genesis 50 or thereabouts, what happened? They were immediately taken advantage of and made to be slaves. And so they knew that they had privileged access to Egypt by virtue of the fact that one of their sons was the prime minister, and he wouldn't allow any legislation to pass that militated against the interests of his own ethnic people. So the moral framework was contributed to, at least legislatively, and legislative context actually results in changes to a nation's culture and morality. And you can prove that very easily. So yes, I would say that although at first glance it would look like the Israelites would have a problem assimilating into Egypt on the basis of their disparate kind of moral systems, nonetheless, it was possible because of the synchronization that was a consequence of one of their people having the most power within that country. So I would say that actually supports your premise that there must be moral compatibility.
Yeah.
Because why didn't they go somewhere else? Why didn't they say, okay, no, thanks, Joseph, for that, but we'll go to one of these other nations? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, when I think back in my own life, right? Growing up, I read American comic books, loved American movies, still do, still think it's...
Like Archie.
Yeah, I read Archie. I loved Archie, I say to my shame.
Yeah.
Sorry to my two viewers. Later on, started watching American movies, Goonies, Gremlins, Ghostbusters, all the 80s classics. Loved it. I still think some of their movies are absolute junk, but it's fantastic. I started recently watching the old Golden Age Hollywood movies. Absolutely brilliant. Some breathtaking monologue and dialogue in those movies. Really, I remember I watched Paris, Texas I think it was last year, and my sister was sitting in the room with me, and the main character, he was delivering a monologue, and my sister wanted to say something at one stage, and I literally stopped her and said, no, because I was just Harry Dean Stanton. He's the lead in Paris, Texas. And it's just unbelievable what these folks brought to the table in terms of... Later on, I started reading American authors. My favorite author is John Steinbeck. Absolutely love John Steinbeck. My favorite theologians are American. John Piper, John MacArthur, Al Mohler. Brilliant thinkers. R.C. Sproul, who I still struggle to understand. He's dead now. So
he's still struggling.
I'm not trying to reach out to him. I'm just struggling to understand the stuff that he's left behind. So I just want to clarify that. And so for me, assimilation, it's like it's a non-issue. I can't imagine having to assimilate if their culture, it's unmistakable. They've imposed their culture on the rest of the world, willingly or not. It's left an indelible mark in my life, which I'm very grateful for. I'm definitely not complaining. When I sit and think about it, it's like, oh, these folks have played a huge part in my life.
There's no question. There's something about their national character that makes them exceptionally good advertisers and marketers. You look at a British film, and it's all kind of edgy, and the actors stoop and may even deliberately get fat and have kind of lank hair and all that kind of thing for it. Whereas the Americans will go and take steroids and wax their chest and get suntans and pin their shirts back and whatever. They just have to make everything look really good.
No, the Brits are like, I'm going to get you. It's completely different. They're in your face.
I know. Even as a youngster, like when I was about 8 years old, my favorite sport was American football. I've never watched a whole game because I think it's just interminable and highly complex. But the kind of marketing,
the highlights. Same with the basketball or the baseball. Highlights are mind-blowing.
And then they had baseball, which was so much more interesting than cricket. Cricket, you've got to be old and very patient to watch a game of cricket.
Well, I mean, that's changed over the 2020.
Oh, well, yeah, I suppose with the Indians, they've really spiced things up.
They've really spiced things up,
But I can remember back in the day. But I mean, that's most of what we had, because They have like 250 million people there. So they've got a much larger talent pool, they've got better funding, and so they can kind of inject their culture into the rest of the world far more effectively than any other nation. It's been pervasive and effective. But I mean, that's a very kind of superficial cultural level. I think even if...
that's pop. That's very pop culture,
I think even in the case of a Boer, who likes his braais...
So to say Boer means boer. Boer. To those,
and he likes his biltong and his castle lager,
braai,
and his rugby, those kinds of things. I think even somebody like that will assimilate far better into American culture than your modern American being born into a progressive family. Because although he'll still hanker after his rugby, the kind of fundamental aspects of life that make you feel loyal or antagonistic are present in the American kind of cultural constitution to a far greater degree than they are in his native country. Because let's just think which is more important. What kind of brand of beer you drink, or the right to defend your family if lunatics break into your house in the middle of the night, high on drugs and wanting to kill you for your television. How you're allowed to respond in that kind of context. In a context like that, castle lager doesn't really matter. It's whether you are permitted to engage your attacker, defend your family.
And just to further to that point is, if you look at America, it's a melting pot of a lot of different cultures, right? I mean, especially from what I understand, I've never been to the States. Hopefully I can go, that's a dream. But it's not like it's not anti-migration or anti. It's Doug Wilson says they're not anti-immigration, they're anti-chaos. It's a similar story of a person who they adopt 2 kids. It's fine; they can handle that. Now the state comes and dumps another 18 kids in your yard and says, "Well, we've got you such a do-gooder, right? You've already got 2 kids. Why don't you just take these 18 extra?" And you try to say, "Whoa, stop your lorry, bro. We're doing well with the 2 kids. They're getting enough love and food. Now adding 18 is not gonna have the same effect, right? You're killing us. You're killing everyone now, including the 2 kids that legally form part of our little family here. And so it's not anti-immigration; it's anti-chaos. And it's great if your curry is fantastic or your whatever food, Creole food that they have down south, if I'm not mistaken. There's a very big Creole influence in down south in the US, and they've got gumbo and all sorts of different chow there. That's
I've had that in Missouri.
So I mean, it's not as if they're saying, "Listen, we're not interested in what you have to bring here. Keep it out. Get out of my country." That's not what they're saying. It's just, listen, we want to do things orderly, right? We want to do things orderly. We don't leave your chaos behind. There's no point in you fleeing your country. So if your country is war torn, what is the point of coming to our country and bringing your war torn mentality with you? That doesn't make sense. Why don't you just go back to where you're from and remain there? So I think that's part of the whole issue as well. Very important to remember. It's not anti anything; it's pro something else. So and I suppose that brings us to a close. Thank you so much, John, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
It's always lucky to speak to someone with a huge IQ and to hear some really good insights. I appreciate that. If you haven't signed up yet, do it. Just click the subscribe button. If it is there, depends on which platform we're going to launch this. If there's no subscribe button, I don't know. You don't have to subscribe, but we'd appreciate it. Thanks more for watching. Cheers. That's 1 hour, 50 minutes. Can I stop here?
Yeah.